You are listening to Despair by Michael Brockbank, Episode 21. Jordan was apprehensive about taking along another young straggler. Due to the inexperience of the young, he felt obligated to do what he could to protect them from danger. Adding yet another child to his party would only make his tasks more difficult. Unfortunately, he felt as though he had no choice. If he wanted answers behind why he traded blows and words with a skeleton, he was going to have to oblige the young man. Besides, it's not like he had anything else to do at the moment. That was one of the freedoms of being a drifter. "When would you like to leave?" he asked. Riley looked back at Weston, concerned that the old man would feel abandoned. "Don't worry about me, son. I'm quite vested to hear how the story plays out for you," he replied to the young wizard, seemingly to know the answer before Riley asked the question. The young man's excitement grew with the prospect of finding anything of Master Galen's at this manor the leather-clad man described. Riley took a few moments to calculate how long it would take him to collect his gear. "Is there any way we could leave first thing in the morning?" he asked. Riley could tell the man was getting frustrated. He also knew that he was holding all of the cards at that moment. If there was one thing that Master Galen had drilled into his head, it was to never be taken advantage of by anyone. "I guess I don't have much of a choice, do I?" Jordan replied, raising an eyebrow with a half smirk across his lips. He thought it was a bit comic that a brave hunter, who has fought a vast number of battles and faced off with grotesque enemies, was now playing nursemaid to a ragtag group of kids. "Not if you want that book translated," Riley assured him with an assertive tone. If it were any other situation, Jordan would have just wished the young man a good day and been on his way. But the oddity of self-aware undead was just too much to ignore. Something about the situation was gnawing at him to understand. "I guess we have a deal. I'm Jordan, and this is Charlotte," the man said, reaching out to take Riley's arm. "I'm Riley," the young man said, taking his arm as a confirmation. "And I'm Narok, though you can't hear me," Narok interrupted. "Tomorrow morning, then. I'll meet you out front," Jordan replied, bowing his head slightly. "Are you sure we can trust him?" Narok asked. "We don't have much of a choice," Riley replied. Jordan stopped and looked at the young man, who was starting to blush from embarrassment. "You're right. We don't." Riley could see the slight suspicion creeping across Jordan's face. The young wizard forced a bit of a smile in the hopes that the leather-clad man would accept his statement as a matter of fact for their situation, and not a reply to an imaginary friend. Jordan turned to walk toward the door, Charlotte still clinging close. "Graceful," said Narok. The young wizard hurriedly made his way to the small room Weston gave him. He had some packing to do and a few things to take care of before starting his adventure in the morning. "What was the dark presence you felt?" Riley asked into the air as he began shoving a few articles of clothing and keepsakes into the bag. "A darkness similar to that in the forest. But this one was far more powerful, and far too familiar," Narok replied. "What do you mean?" "It's a long story, but not to worry. The darkness has faded." Riley spent the remainder of the day packing provisions and everything he could think of needing for the journey. It didn't take him long, considering the young wizard didn't have a lot of gear to begin with. "Are you sure this is wise?" Narok asked, hoping to get some reassurance that the young man indeed knew what he was doing. "It's the only lead we have to find Master Galen." If Weston is correct, Galen would have died centuries ago. Riley stopped packing and looked up at the ceiling. He had hoped to find his master and figure out a way to get home. But Narok was right. The old man would have died long before then. The young wizard drew in a deep breath as he prepared his mind for the truth. "I know. Let's just hope we can find some answers out there," Riley replied, looking back at the dagger resting on his bed. The young wizard continued to push various items into the satchel. Dried foods, books, jars of various concoctions he had put together while learning what he could from Weston. It all seemed to fit quite nicely. How much can I fit in this thing? He asked more to himself than Narok. You'd be amazed, my boy. Are you about done trying to fit your room into that bag? Not quite. There's still one more thing I need to do, Riley replied, turning to walk out the door. It was nearing evening when Tessa made her weekly visit to the clothier in town. The seamstress was quite talented and created some of the most elegant dresses the young girl had ever seen. Her bodyguard was close behind, insisted by her stepfather to keep an eye on her. She had been keeping a watchful eye for Riley when she walked about town, and every so often she would see him and smile. Unfortunately, the bodyguard of the day would only allow the briefest of exchanges. Tessa felt more like her stepfather's prisoner than her daughter. She was certain if it wasn't for her gifts that he wouldn't care as much. Good evening, Tessa. And what brings you by today? Lady Arnett was a middle-aged, fine-figured woman who could put together scraps of cloth and leather to create a magnificent blouse. She was one of the few people in town who wasn't afraid of Burgomaster Caldwell and treated Tessa like the young woman she was. Good evening, milady, she replied with a curtsy. I wish you wouldn't do that. My name is Arnett, not milady, the woman said with a smile. I think I have something you might like to see today. Oh? Something wonderful, I hope. You could say that. Lady Arnett began to usher Tessa toward the back of the shop. The bodyguard stood at the door with a keen and watchful eye. He knew better than to interfere with the young woman. His job was to keep her from the general public, not to watch her try on clothing. Besides, Lady Arnett wouldn't have it. She has been known to not pull a punch when men cross boundaries, and the last thing the guard wanted to do was to explain a blackened eye to Caldwell. Arnett brought Tessa to the far corner of the shop. Before her, on a table, was a sprawling, beautiful red silk dress. Oh, that is lovely, Tessa exclaimed, running her fingers across the fabric. Take your time, Arnett said with a smile as she turned to walk away. As the young woman continued to appreciate the dress, she felt a familiar sensation. It was one that she had felt several times over the past month, and it was one that she would wish she could explore further. Where are you? She whispered as a smile quickly swept across her lips. Wow, you are good, Riley replied. I'm under the table. She had only been able to speak with him a handful of times since the young man's arrival in town. Her bodyguards never allowed for more than a few brief words. It was her stepfather's suggestion that she kept herself pure. However, she found herself thinking of the young wizard quite often. If they catch you, which they won't, I couldn't leave without saying goodbye. Goodbye? She asked with deep concern. Yes, I'll be leaving tomorrow morning. I may have some answers about how I got here. How long will you be away? There was quite a long pause after Tessa's question. Riley didn't know what to say to her. It wasn't like they were in love or anything, but there was something kindled between the two of them. I don't know, he finally replied. She was saddened to hear that he was leaving. You will return, won't you? Again, another long pause as the young man sought an answer. I don't know. I would very much prefer it if you did. His heart began to pound, but he wasn't sure if it was from her soft-spoken words or because he was under a table draped with cloth and hiding from a large, burly man who looked like he could break every bone in his much smaller frame. Then I will do what I can, I promise. Tessa, we need to go now, a voice boomed from across the shop. The bodyguard's voice was gruff and commanding without an ounce of respect. Be careful, she whispered to the table and turning to walk toward the door. The shopkeeper gave Tessa and her bodyguard a few moments to walk down the road before heading to the table in the back. Arnett lifted up the part of the cloth draped across and covering the underneath to smile at Riley. You're playing a dangerous game, little man, she said, helping him out from under the table. Why is her father so overbearing? Riley asked, standing to his feet. Stepfather. He's always been that way since Tessa's mother passed. Her life has been quite sheltered from the world, and it's so sad to see how something so beautiful wilts on the vine. What do you mean? Until a month ago, I don't think I've ever seen that girl smile for more than a few moments at a time. Lately, though, she's been a different person. Arnett could tell how infatuated Tessa was with Riley. The young girl talked about him as often as she could, out of earshot of her guards. Well, thank you for helping me. It's my pleasure. Anything I can do to see that girl smile.